I would like to begin by acknowledging the traditional custodians of Australia and their connections to land, sea, sky, and community. I pay my respects to elders past, present, and emerging, and I extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples listening today. Hello, my love, and welcome to the April and Fritz podcast. My name is Brie, and I am so happy that you're here. Today, I'm going to be touching on a topic that it may be a little bit close to home for some people. If I'm being completely honest, I have spent a lot of time kind of going over whether or not I'd even like to touch on this topic, but that is the topic around death and funerals and end of life. And for anybody who doesn't know, my father-in-law is currently very ill with a form of lung cancer that you get from asbestos. So I think the concept of life and death has really been kind of hitting quite close to home for me recently, but also in particular for my partner, Rob. But it is a service that I do offer in my business, that service being that of custom funeral flowers. And I wanted to get into it today because I think it is one of the areas of my business where it brings a level of closeness and intimacy with my clients that is really unparalleled. And the reality is that, when someone passes away, there are so many emotions, and typically people are quite overcome with emotion. And that is really the difference when it comes to funeral planning, to any other type of event planning that we do. And outside of obviously the death of a loved one, there is also just this really strong desire that, we create a tribute that truly honors that person or gives them a send-off really that represents them. And so when my clients do come to me, I find that even if I have known them for a long time, maybe we've worked together in the past, it's really a time when that relationship goes to the next level, because to be trusted, with something so precious to someone, that honor and that responsibility is really not lost on me, I guess. So today we're going to be talking about custom funeral flowers and really the significance that holds and how we go about creating custom florals for funerals to get the best possible send-off for the people that come to us. And so, again, I just want to thank you so much for being here and spending this time with me. I am forever grateful that you are listening and spending your earbud time with me. So let's get into it. So for me to kind of talk about this topic, I feel like we need to go back a little bit. And like most people, I think my relationship with death has probably been an interesting one. It's not something that I have personally ever been really close to, I suppose. And even just honestly, the idea of showing up to funerals, often I get, swept up in the emotion of it all. So when I was starting my business, this is not really a space that I was thinking about primarily. I was thinking more along the lines of weddings and events and, bringing people together for all these joyous reasons. But it was actually my partner, Rob, who changed my mind about funerals and death and kind of this whole world. So he is a doctor. He's currently a GP, but when he was training, he did spend some time on the palliative care ward during his studies. And when he spoke about death and the experience that he had on that ward, it was never kind of spoken about in a way that was gruesome or scary or anything like that. It was often actually quite the opposite. It was often quite loving. And the way that I think about it is that on any given palliative care ward at any given time, there is somebody there who is saying their final farewells, someone who is telling their family how much they love them, their favorite memories with them, and so much more. And typically it's families or friends or whoever, they're just so grateful to the staff around, the support that they were showing their family member or their friend, on their last days. And I guess the way that he kind of reframed that whole side to life, it honestly gave me a sense of warmth and love and kind of beauty around that, from what he had seen and the experience that he had had while there. And so initially this was actually what piqued my interest. I was kind of curious about the idea of supporting people while they were grieving. And not many people actually know this about me, but I am a funeral celebrant as well. And that discussion with him really kind of led me down the path to find the Funeral Fix training in person here in Melbourne about a year ago now. And it was here that I really started to feel like I could make a difference, I guess. And in particular, it was during this training that I learned about the significance of rituals, doing funeral or end of life ceremonies that included rituals. And for anybody who doesn't know, a ritual is about turning something that mattered most to the person that you're honoring into some kind of a meaningful act. And it's really about kind of reflecting the person and facilitating healing, really. So there are a million different examples out there of rituals. And just to name a few, there could be like a candle lighting ceremony, or, that it could be even as simple as watching a photo slideshow of the individual's life. So when I was at this training, it just really kind of clicked for me. I wanted to create custom funeral flowers. Traditionally, what happens is, you'll go to a funeral director and, you'll be making the plans with them for your person. And typically what happens is, they'll pull out some kind of old book or, some kind of menu of some kind, which has different options on there for flowers. And, you essentially just like pick off the menu and they organize it, which on the surface, I think is a great concept. When I think about the emotion and kind of everything that's going on at that time. But I think in that moment at that training, I really kind of understood that there was a real opportunity here to honor people in their life. And I guess it was also in this moment that I really kind of started thinking about April and Fritz, not just as a wedding or event florist, but as a lifelong florist. And it really informed the way that I built my business in terms of getting to know someone, their family, their friends, the stories of their life, and create something that truly reflected them. This could be anything as well, right? It could be their passion for outdoor walks. It could be their garden that they loved, or, for example, my grandpa has like the best bonsai collection in the world. And it was at that point in that training that I just kind of realized, like, this is something that I can do something with. This is about reflecting the person, and this is what I'm all about. And so you might be wondering, what would I do for somebody like my grandpa, let's just say. So as I already mentioned, my grandpa has like the best collection of, bonsais that I've ever seen. And it is essentially, if you don't know what they are, then they're these little Japanese trees that, you kind of tend to and you like play with and shape and form. And there's a whole kind of practice behind it. And when I was growing up, he actually had a nursery where he used to sell them. And so I guess for somebody like my grandpa, I suppose I'd always kind of imagined that, his send-off would include those bonsais, and maybe even like, I don't know, photos of him working on them from my nana. And, the nursery that he used to have like had these old cypress trees. And so maybe like working them in somewhere. And I don't know, like he even had this little pond in his nursery that had like koi fish in it. And so given his kind of love of Japanese gardening, I would probably use things like ikebana practices for a majority of the arrangements. And look, the list goes on, but just to kind of give you a sense of like, how can we work those things in to truly represent the person rather than it just being about the aesthetic or, a tick the box exercise. And again, if I go back to that training, it was really in that moment that I felt like, okay, I can help people create memories and moments, I suppose, that will stay with them long after their person has actually gone. And to me, I think there is something so significant about that moment of that kind of final goodbye. Just to kind of like name a few, like it could be like somebody saying goodbye to the love of their life for 70 years. It could be to a family member that they've known their entire life, or, their friend that they've shared their deepest secrets with for 20 years. Like it's their final goodbye. And, I'm not here to say that that's the only memory or their fondest memory with that person by any stretch of the imagination. But what I am saying is that, and I'm sure you've probably experienced this too in some capacity, but imagine the last moments that you have with someone that you care about so deeply, and it just like not looking like them, it's not feeling like them, it's not smelling like them or sounding like them or whatever. And it's your last chance to say goodbye. And that's a moment that you'll never get back. And so I think the significance of that moment is really not lost on me. And I would argue that it's just as significant as something like a wedding where, you're marrying the love of your life. So it matters. Funerals and end of life services and celebrations of life, they matter. And it's often not until it's too late to think about how much they matter that we actually realize this. So with my approach to funeral flowers, and custom kind of floral design, it really caters to more modern funerals. And the reality is, the reason why that is because for a custom floral design to be successful, it really needs to complement the type of service or funeral that, is going to be happening. So my approach for funeral design really caters to more modern funerals, I would say. And with modern funerals, there are a few things that I do look at, which I'll get into in a moment. But it's important to kind of call that out because, again, we're moving away from that traditional kind of approach. And that's important because the work that I do in getting to know people and understanding their story, it needs to complement this kind of service or funeral that it is. And so what I'm kind of looking for when, we're talking about funeral flowers is that the funeral service is actually personalized. And this means that it is truly about the person and there's no kind of cookie cutter, pick off the menu kind of vibes. And it's more than that as well. I guess it's about framing it as a celebration of life rather than it purely focusing on the grief or the mourning. And there is obviously, so much space for that too. Like, funerals and, the end of somebody's life brings out so many different emotions and feelings. But what I've found is that when I'm working with family or friends that are interested in sharing their person's stories and talking about their fond memories, they're really, I guess, more open to creating a more uplifting and kind of positive atmosphere. And that level of openness is kind of what is required for the kind of custom funeral flowers that we do. And lastly, I suppose, when we're working with people, we're kind of looking for people who embrace the alternative. So, for example, I just recently had a friend and a client who was celebrating somebody in their life at a winery. And it's because they loved visiting vineyards and drinking wine. And I love the inspiration that comes with something like a different venue to the standard church or hall or whatever it is. Because in that example, I can look to the landscape to kind of shape that design and build that narrative in. So anywhere that may be not traditional, I suppose, or an approach that is not traditional is going to create some kind of inspiration. And when I'm kind of sitting down with a client, I'm really listening to the story of that person. What do they love? What was their relationship with nature like? What was their personality like? What did they love? What did they hate? And this is probably my most favorite part of the process, to be honest with you, because clients share stories and they laugh, they cry, they kind of share more stories. And it's often at this point in time too that, I'll get shown photos or taken on like a video call tour around their garden or whatever. And it's beautiful, it's a really beautiful moment to kind of reflect on somebody's life and be able to capture all of that and start embodying it into a design. So once that kind of conversation is over, I really get into thinking primarily about a couple of different things, but, how can I accurately represent this person and honor their life? How can I make this a multi kind of sensory experience? Is it like more of the visuals that I'm going to be leaning into, or is it like a particular scent that we want to work in? lavender, for example, if they loved lavender. And lastly, how can I facilitate healing amongst this person's community? Like, for example, using nature to create rituals, such as like tree planting ceremonies or inviting family and friends to place a rose. And what I found is that this approach really leads me down the right path 99% of the time. It's pretty incredible to think back on some of the funeral work that, I've designed and have been a part of. And to be totally honest with you, maybe on the surface, it's not as pretty or aesthetic as some of the other work that we do, but there is a significance there behind it that resonates so deeply with those who need it. And that's what this work is all about. And so you might be thinking like, okay, Brie, like, you shared all about like funeral flowers and what you want to do and blah, 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 blah. But like, what do you actually want for yourself? And it's funny because I get asked this question quite a lot. And the answer is, to be totally honest with you, I don't know. And I'm imagining something like, very connected to nature and very abundant and probably quite dramatic just because of the person that I am. But I do feel like I still have so much life to live. And I guess it's never too early to really start thinking about this, but I do feel like it is too early at the same time. So right now, for example, like just as an example, I like the beach. I don't love it, but like, I didn't grow up near the beach or, love the ocean or anything like that. But what happens if Rob and I move next to the beach and we love it and that's where we raise our children, for example? Maybe that's something that, I'll want to work into my send off. I don't know yet. So I do feel like up until this point, like there's probably been enough life to live to create something really, really beautiful. And I definitely intend on doing that, but it's still too early to say. And so I guess, I know you may not be thinking about this right now, and it might even be a little bit scary to kind of think about. As I said at the start of this episode, it might even be a little bit too close to home for you right now, but I do encourage you to have a conversation with your loved ones about what they want for their final farewell. And when you are ready, we are here to make that a reality. It's about so much more than just, like I said, grabbing some really pretty flowers and popping it on a casket or whatever it is. And so you know where to find me. But if you don't, you can find me over on Instagram at April and Fritz, or you can catch me over at my website at aprilandfritz.com.au. And so as we just kind of wrap up today's episode, I do have one little teeny tiny ask, and that is that if you did like this episode, please feel free to review it or rate it, and I would just be so thankful. Thank you again for being here. Thank you for allowing me to even have this conversation. I love talking about funeral flowers and kind of connecting with people and really building something and creating something that really represents their person. And so I'm really, really, really grateful to you to allow me to do that.